From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. The presidential campaign sees the final weeks of the race to crystallize closing arguments in a media blitz that continues tonight. Kamala Harris on Fox News, Donald Trump on Univision, each trying to appeal to constituencies they need to win the election. We'll have more with Jessica Taylor of the Cook Political Report, who's also watching Senate races that will decide the balance of power on Capitol Hill. Israel expands airstrikes in Lebanon and steps up attacks in Gaza, even as the U.S. threatens to cut some military assistance to Israel if it does not increase humanitarian aid to Palestinian civilians. We'll have more on this from Evelyn Farkas from the McCain Institute at Arizona State University. Thanks for joining us on the Wednesday edition of Balance of Power. 20 days now until the election, and both presidential candidates are dedicating their time and efforts to the swing states while appearing in some high-profile interviews. They're not done yet. Donald Trump appearing in a town hall with female voters taped in Georgia, aired on Fox News earlier today, in which he faced questions about abortion.
It's back in the states where they can have the vote of the people. It's exactly where they want to be. Remember this issue has torn this country apart for 52 years. So we got it back in the states. We have a vote of the people, and it's working its way through the system. And ultimately, it's going to be the right thing.
Well, Vice President Kamala Harris is in Pennsylvania right now, taping an interview with Fox News anchor Bret Baier. It's going to air a bit later on today. She campaigned with Republican lawmakers earlier in Pennsylvania, talked about the threat, she says, posed by Trump.
I am joined today by over 100 Republican leaders from across Pennsylvania and across our country who are supporting my candidacy for President of the United States. At stake in this election is the Constitution of the United States, its very self. We are here today because we share a core belief that we must put country before party.
Joining us now, Bloomberg's Texas bureau chief, Julie Fine, with her eyes on the campaign trail. We start at the top of the ticket here. Julie, thanks for joining. No mystery why and how the campaigns are making these decisions to target specific constituencies here as they make their closing arguments.
Yeah, I mean, that is what they're doing as they try to, get through the next 3 weeks and win this election. I mean, you talk about the former president. He is with women voters talking about abortion. That is not a winning issue for him. He, again, is trying to talk about how it's up to the states. But you have to remember, this is because of a decision that came from the Supreme Court. 3 of the judges that he put in place there. So, again, he is going with this message that we continue to hear from him, that it's in the states and that states are making their own decisions as to what to do next. But, again, this is a difficult argument for him, and he's doing it in front of a constituency he really needs.
Yeah, that's right. And Kamala Harris finally doing the big interview on Fox. Obviously, the stakes are high here. Julie, how much of an impression can she make with less than 3 weeks till the election?
Well, this is obviously an interview that she is doing because the polls have closed and she needs to speak to this constituency. Of course, she's with Republican leaders today, but you're talking about Republican leaders that you may expect to vote for her anyways. They are ones that have already come out and spoke about the former president, saying that he is not the right candidate. So that's no surprise. Now she goes on Fox News because, again, she wants to appeal to this constituency. And it's also a point where she hasn't done a lot of interviews. Now, because of where the polls are, she simply has to.
Yeah. Well, that's right. And we'll all be watching together. Of course, there was an important debate, hits close to home last night for you. Julie Fine, Republican Senator Ted Cruz, Democratic Congressman Colin Allred had a rather heated exchange in their debate for the Texas Senate seat. Let's listen.
But Senator Cruz just called himself pro-life. You're not. You're not pro-life. It's not pro-life to deny women care so long that they can't have children anymore.
Congressman Allred has voted to tell you, a mother at home, you have no right to know if your daughter's getting an abortion. That's an extreme position. And I can tell you the overwhelming majority of Texans do not agree with Congressman Allred.
Julie, new polling from University of Houston out today finds a 4-point lead for Ted Cruz. Does that change after last night? I think we may have lost Julie Fine. Julie, thank you for joining. Texas Bureau Chief, sorry that we lost Julie just at that moment. 4-point advantage over Colin Allred as we now find ourselves in the throes of these Senate debates, more of which we'll be talking about later this week as we turn our focus now to the Middle East, where Israel stepped up airstrikes on Lebanon and says they've killed a senior Hezbollah leader there, as Lebanon's prime minister claims he had been assured by the U.S. that assaults on Beirut would ease. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre earlier today.
We have told Israel directly that we oppose any Israeli campaign to certainly of near daily strikes in densely populated area in Beirut. You are correct. That is something that we have been very clear about. We also understand that what they're conducting, the operations that they're conducting to destroy Hezbollah infrastructure is targeted. And so we'll continue to have those conversations with the Israeli government.
Joining us now with the latest on the standoff in the Middle East, Bloomberg's Dan Flatley. Dan, thanks for being here. The wait continues on a lot of fronts as we try to get a sense of where Israel is going in its response to Iran. But we're watching intense fighting targeting Beirut once again to the north, and a lot of questions about strategy to the south. This remains a three-front situation in your view. How would you describe it?
Yes, I mean, certainly a lot of things are happening right now in and around Israel, Gaza, the Gaza Strip, and Lebanon, as you said, Joe. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot. I've sort of been keeping an eye on the oil markets, and we've seen some activity there. But so far, basically with slowdown in Chinese demand and, sort of some more supply coming online, there really hasn't been as much of a jump as some had expected. But a lot of that has to do with some of the rhetoric, some of the signaling, some of the things that we're hearing both in the U.S. and in Israel about what Israel is likely to target in this response. Right. And so there's been a lot of intense diplomacy, a lot of negotiations, a lot of talk about how Israel should respond. Should they go after military targets? Will they go after oil infrastructure? Will they go after nuclear sites? Mm-hmm. And basically the state of play at the moment, as we understand it, is that Israel will respond by targeting Iranian military sites. Yep. Those sites associated with the ballistic missile attack that Iran carried out on Israel, and not go after oil infrastructure, not go after nuclear sites. And that's, it's an interesting development. We saw on Friday the U.S. rolled out some new sanctions on Iran's oil industry, and that is part of the discussion here as well. But obviously still a lot of airstrikes, a lot of fighting, both to Israel's north and to its west in Gaza.
Well, so, as the response plan comes together for Iran, Israel is also facing more pressure over what's happening in Gaza. Is the U.S. about to condition some military aid based on humanitarian assistance? Is that the direction we're going in?
I think that what we're likely to see is, keep in mind, Israel is a very close ally of the United States, obviously. We're in a tense election season. There's a lot of things happening, and we know from what we've seen so far with the Biden administration is they like to move incrementally. So are we going to see a sudden cessation of U.S. supply of arms and ammunition to Israel? Not likely. What you're more likely to see is some sort of signaling to Israel that, you need to take these issues seriously, and there needs to be some more attention paid to the humanitarian situation in Gaza and getting those supplies through. Yeah. Ultimately, it's going to be up to the Israelis how they want to respond to that, and will they. We saw, they sent the U.S. sent this THAAD missile system, high-altitude missile system, to Israel. So that is conflicting a little bit with this idea that we're going to condition arms supplies to Israel. So there's a lot of things that are moving here. But I think what you're likely to see, to your point, Joe, is an incremental signaling on the part of the U.S. that this humanitarian situation is serious. Israel needs to address it. And if they don't, there may be, you may see some announcements, some slowing down potentially in future shipments, not those that are directly tied to the fighting that's happening now.
This feels like familiar territory. Bloomberg's Dan Flatley. Thank you, Dan, for great reporting on our national security team here in Washington. Coming up, we'll have a closer look at the escalating tensions in the Middle East with the McCain Institute's Evelyn Farkas. Her take next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
We have seen them taking initial steps over the past several days, but of course the proof will be in the pudding ultimately, and we want to see them take additional steps, and we want to see ultimately the results change, and the results will be more trucks coming in, more food getting in, more water getting in, and civilians having the basic needs that they require to go about their daily lives.
State Department spokesman Matthew Miller earlier today in Washington on Israel sending more aid to Palestinian civilians in Gaza. With us now is Evelyn Farkas to carry on our conversation. She's executive director of the McCain Institute at Arizona State University and former deputy assistant secretary of defense for Russia and Ukraine. Evelyn, it's good to see you. As Matt Miller talks about different results, does conditioning some portion of U.S. military aid bring them?
Yeah, I think, Joe, it seems that the Israeli government is listening to our government on a few things. They haven't struck at Iranian oil facilities or nuclear facilities, I should say, yet, because we don't know. They might still do that, but it appears from the reporting that they might not do that. So that means they're listening to us on that score. But they're not listening to us, as you just described in the conversation before, in the segment before, when it comes to how they're fighting in Gaza. And that is a problem. So if you're the U.S. president, you should condition, or you should at least threaten to condition military assistance. Presidents have done that before. It's not a new thing. So I would say that if I were in the White House, I would at least do it privately, if not publicly.
So when we talk about American influence here, or at least, or more specifically, the influence of the Biden administration, seeing reports here that a response to Iran has essentially been crafted, and it includes targeting Iran military sites, not oil or nuclear. Are Joe Biden's fingerprints on that plan?
Yes, I would say so, because he very clearly signaled publicly that Israel should not strike nuclear facilities and also should not strike oil facilities. I believe the G7 joined him in both of those kind of declarations. And it looks like the Israeli government heard us loud and clear, which is, of course, helpful. But across the board, Israel isn't listening to everything. And part of it has to do with the right-wing government in power right now in Israel. And this right-wing government would like to fight in Gaza, frankly, so that Israel can reoccupy it.
Yeah, I want to, before we move on to some other geopolitical issues here, Evelyn, I want to bring us back to Donald Trump's interview yesterday on Bloomberg. How are you feeling about the response time for Israel and Iran? How long is this window going to be open?
Well, my guess is anyone's, I guess, which is to say that we don't know exactly how long it's going to take. But it is possible that Israel will wait until after our elections, wait to see who is going to be the next president. Because if I were the Israeli government and I had the luxury of waiting just a few weeks in order to see that end result, I would, unless I thought that there would be somehow a situation where I wouldn't have as much freedom of action. But I think in this case, given the two candidates, and given the fact that Donald Trump is likely to give more leeway to Israel, but also sometimes unpredictable, I would wait if I were Netanyahu. So I'm expecting them to wait till after November 5th.
Interesting. Of course, you do wonder the extent to which the election plays into this. Donald Trump was asked yesterday in his interview with John Micklethwait, our editor-in-chief at Bloomberg, about his feelings on various world leaders. This was in partnership with the Economic Club of Chicago. We'll bring you back to yesterday, Evelyn. Let's listen.
Russia has never had a president that they respect so much. I said to Angela Merkel when she was there, she's not there anymore, I wonder why. If I'm friendly with people, if I have a relationship with people, that's a good thing, not a bad thing, in terms of a country. I had a very good relationship with President Xi, and a very good relationship with Putin, and a very good relationship with Kim Jong-un, who has a nuclear force that you won't even believe.
Evelyn, I know you're deeply connected to diplomatic circles as well as defense circles. Does Donald Trump have a point? Do these relationships actually help secure America?
No. I mean, I think, yes, you want to be able to pick up the phone and talk to world leaders. You want them to respect you. But at the end of the day, we're not looking for friendship from these autocrats. Let's not forget that all of the nations you just listed, or he listed in that clip, China, North Korea, Russia, these are countries that are working counter to U.S. national security interests. So President Trump, in saying that he wants to be friends with these people, is missing the point. His job is to advocate and to get the best possible outcome for the U.S. from the national security perspective, which means, frankly, standing up to those autocrats, standing up to them and denying them what they want. But we know time and time again, he's been unwilling to do that, certainly when it comes to Russia, at least rhetorically, and sometimes also when it comes to real life decisions. And with China, it's an uneven playing field there, uneven record. It's hard to say exactly how he'll come out on China, because sometimes he is tough on China, but across the board, it doesn't look like he has the appetite to counter China and really to stand up for the interests of our allies. Because the other part of this is that the United States leads alliances, and we derive a lot of strength from these alliances: economic strength, political strength, military strength. So we're not going to leave Japan hanging if China's challenging Japan, for example. So he also made a point. Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to ask you, while in the moment that we have left, Evelyn, about Kamala Harris. Does she have the relationships that could help to manage a geopolitical crisis, or is it an advantage that she does not?
I think it's neutral. Clearly, she has some relationships. She's met with President Zelensky, so she has an ability to talk with these folks. She has a familiarity with them. She's met with Xi, I think, also several times. So that is helpful. I mean, not starting from zero. But again, the idea is not to create friendships. It's to create conversations, to create a certain amount of trust so that they know when you are discussing things with them that your word is good, whether you're threatening them or offering them some sort of a sweetener. So in negotiating with foreign countries, you want to have the ability to speak to them, to have them pick up the phone, but you're not trying to be friends with them. You want to have credibility. You want to have legitimacy. So I think she will have to develop some more of these relationships, but she has ones already with some of these players.
It's always a pleasure to spend some time. Evelyn Farkas, Executive Director at the McCain Institute at Arizona State University. Evelyn, thank you. Coming up, billionaire investor Stanley Druckenmiller weighing in on who he says markets are pointing towards winning the upcoming election. An exclusive interview today on Bloomberg. We'll bring it to you next on Balance of Power, Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Thanks for joining us. We consider every day on this program the view Wall Street has of the presidential campaign, something Bloomberg's Sonali Basak discussed earlier today exclusively with billionaire investor Stanley Druckenmiller, chair and CEO of the Duquesne family office. Let's listen.
It's an evolving situation. If you had asked me this 12 days ago, I would have said, I don't have a clue. It's a total toss-up. I still don't have conviction who's going to win on the election. But as I said earlier, I like market indicators for the economy and for financial restrictiveness. I also like them for elections. I remember how right the market was on Ronald Reagan in 1980, despite what the pundits were saying. And I must say, in the last 12 days, the market and the inside of the market is very convinced Trump is going to win. You can see it in the bank stocks. You can see it in crypto. You can even see it in DJT, his social media company. But throughout the whole I would say the industries that are deregulated, if we had deregulations, will benefit from Trump or outperform the others. So if you put a gun to my head, and thank God there's not one to my head, so this really doesn't matter, I would say that I would have to guess Trump is the favorite to win the election now, but who knows what these polls even mean? No one even responds to them anymore. But that's what we're looking at. I think the delta between, let's say, 4 outcomes: blue sweep, red sweep, Trump with a blue branch of Congress, Harris with a red branch of Congress. First of all, I think the blue sweep is extremely unlikely. Even if Harris wins the presidency, looking at state-by-state polls, it looks like the Republicans are going to win the Senate. Where you get a blue sweep, I think just the math of taxes, business confidence, lack of animal spirits, no change in the regulation front in investors' minds, you could get you would have a rough time for equities, I would think, for 3 to 6 months. I think this would probably translate in the economy because equity ownership is 25% of financial assets at an all-time high. That was 15% just not that long ago. So that's the blue sweep. But the good news or the bad news, depending on how you view life, is I think it's highly unlikely, so that playbook is probably going to be irrelevant.
So what about a red sweep?
A red sweep, which I think is probably more likely than a Trump presidency with a blue Congress, because personally I think anybody that votes for Trump is probably not going to change their ballot for a Democrat in Congress. A red sweep, I think you get animal spirits in the business community, you get deregulation, and there might be some sort of uplift relative to where they were in terms of the business community. So I think the economy could be potentially stronger for 3 to 6 months. My fear would be, because of those reasons, and because I think bond yields already don't reflect a proper economic outlook, you would probably get a bad response in the fixed income markets, which could then snuff out the equity rally.
Stanley Druckenmiller talking with Sonali Basak in New York. By the way, he said he could not see himself voting for either candidate. He'll probably write someone in. You can watch that full interview on the terminal and online. Fascinating analysis. And coming up, we'll have more as we go down ballot to look at some key Senate races on Balance of Power. This is Bloomberg TV and Radio.
Bob Casey went to the Senate to change Washington. Washington changed Bob Casey. He is completely out of step with the values and views of Pennsylvanians. He's voted for a series of things that have made our Commonwealth much worse. So I think he needs to be replaced, and that's why I'm running.
While I was doing that bipartisan work in Pennsylvania, he was investing in our adversaries, investing in China and investing in Russia.
Let's move on to the next topic. Next topic, please.
I got to respond to that.
Democratic Senator Bob Casey and his Republican challenger Dave McCormick just last night during a debate between the two candidates running for the Pennsylvania Senate seat, one of several closely contested races that will determine which party controls the chamber. And joining us now with the landscape, Jessica Taylor, the Senate and governor's editor at the Cook Political Report. Jessica, it's great to see you. Welcome back to Bloomberg TV and Radio. Let's start here in Pennsylvania, where Bob Casey seems to be holding his own fairly well. Following this debate last night, what are the polls telling you, and what's Bob Casey doing right?
Well, I think Republicans do have this race tightening, and I think we've seen these other states, Wisconsin in particular, which of course we shifted last week, sort of move more in line with the presidential numbers. I think there is just still that the Casey brand is still strong in Pennsylvania. That his comes from a political family. His father was governor. He's been able to sort of outrun where Harris is. But I mean, Pennsylvania is not a state that Democrats feel super confident about at the presidential level, and I think that runs on down just simply because, while they're leading in polling, you look at things like Republicans cutting into their registration advantage. I do think that McCormick is coming more in line with Trump's numbers, and that could be good for him. Certainly, that's where he wants to be as this presidential race continues to tighten. But I think this is one that, again, we could see tightening in these last few days.
Well, that's interesting. We were just showing our TV viewers and our viewers on YouTube. The most recent New York Times Siena poll has Bob Casey up by 4 points. This is far from a commanding lead when you factor in the margin of error, certainly here. Exactly. But, Jessica, there's a lot of talk about ticket splitting in states like Pennsylvania. I'm not sure I understand it. Could there be a world in which Kamala Harris wins the presidency and Dave McCormick wins the Senate race, or it just doesn't work like that?
I mean, I think that's a little harder for me to see because I do think that we see Casey running ahead of Harris. But, again, if Trump wins Pennsylvania, though, that's certainly good news for McCormick. I mean, could Casey still win if Trump wins the state? I could see that as well. Yeah. We've seen such a decrease in ticket splitting where in 2016, every single Senate race went the same way as the presidential race. In 2020, only Susan Collins managed to win re-election. But when we're talking about races that are being decided by just a few points, that is a delta in which we could see a number of ticket splitters because we are seeing a wider delta, particularly in Arizona, where actually Trump is polling the best of any of the swing states. But yet we continue.
Santa Cruz versus Toyota Tacoma. Look what Santa Cruz.
We're all swimming in the same media pool here, I think, Jessica. I have to turn attention from Pennsylvania to Ohio based on what you just said, because Sherrod Brown seems to be performing pretty well in his contest. And this is a state that's otherwise looking pretty red. Could we have a world in which Donald Trump wins Ohio as expected and Sherrod Brown keeps his seat?
Well, again, Susan Collins was sort of at 7 points she was able to outrun Biden by. I think that's sort of the universe we're looking at. And I think if anyone can do it, it's Sherrod Brown. Trump won the state twice by 8. I've seen some polls with it slightly closer at the presidential level. Certainly that bodes well for Sherrod Brown. Moreno has been, I think, a weaker candidate than Republicans expected him to be. And he is sort of underperforming where Trump's numbers are in the state. So he needs more so than anyone to decrease those ticket splitters. But Brown is still getting independents and a significant number of Republicans. I think this one is going to be very, very close.
So let's go to Texas for a moment. We were talking earlier with our Texas bureau chief about the Senate race here. This is supposed to be a runaway for Ted Cruz, and this looks like a 4-point race as well, based on what we've seen from the University of Houston. Again, Senator Ted Cruz, Democratic Congressman Colin Allred, they did get together last evening for the big debate here, fighting for the U.S. Senate seat. Here's a piece of what they had to say when it got to the matter, Jessica, of January 6th.
Congressman Allred is happy to talk about those who committed acts of violence on January 6th, but you don't hear him talking about the Antifa and Black Lives Matter riots that burned cities across this country. If you commit an act of violence, you should go to jail, and there should be no political favoritism in that regard.
I took off my suit jacket, and I was prepared to defend the House floor from the mob. At the same time, after he'd gone around the country lying about the election, after he'd been the architect of the attempt to overthrow that election, when that mob came, Senator Cruz was hiding in a supply closet. And that's okay. I don't want him to get hurt by the mob. I really don't.
Pretty poignant moment, Jessica, memorable. There were several in that debate last night. But if Beto couldn't do it, can Allred do it?
I think there's a couple of things that make this race a little different than 2018. I think it is tougher in a presidential year, but I think abortion, the Dobbs decision had not been decided at this point. Allred has made abortion very much a center point. That was probably one of the tensest moments that they had in the debate last night, where Allred's running an ad of a woman who was forced to go outside of the state to seek care, talking about how she had to leave her other children behind when her baby was diagnosed with a fatal fetal abnormality that
The Zoom gods may not be with us here. Jessica Taylor, the Senate and Governor's editor at the Cook Political Report. We got through a couple of races, Jessica. Thank you. I don't know if we can try to reconnect, or sometimes the internet is not playing in your favor. An important conversation. As we talk about presidential politics every day here on Balance of Power, there are some key Senate races, House as well, and they're showing their colors this week in some really important debates that we're going to be talking about as we make our way closer to November 5th. Coming up on Balance of Power, we'll assemble our panel. They're coming up next to weigh in on a key post-election issue. Who will lead Senate and House Republicans in the next Congress? We connect the dots next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Here now, can you say, if Donald Trump does not win, do you commit to certifying the election results?
Kristen, I'm a constitutional law attorney. I've dedicated my life, devoted my life, and demonstrated every day that I will uphold the Constitution. We are going to do our job in Congress. A free and fair and legal election will be certified, and that is our hope and prayer across the board. Of course I'm going to follow the Constitution. I'm going to follow the law. That's my job. It's my duty. I took an oath to do that, and I will fulfill my oath.
Speaker of the House Mike Johnson this past weekend on Meet the Press, NBC, answering whether or not he would certify the election results. Joining us now this evening's political panel, Sarah Chamberlain is back with us, President and CEO of Republican Main Street Partnership and Republican strategist, alongside Pat Dennis, President of American Bridge 21st Century, Democratic strategist. Wonderful to see you both. Thanks for being here. Talk to me about how the Speaker is doing, Sarah, because there was a time when this was looked at as a temporary job. His fundraising, though, has been on the upswing. And his races are looking pretty good depending on the district that you're in. His frontliners seem to be feeling good about the fact that Donald Trump is feeling good at the top of the ticket. You have a unique view from Main Street. Tell us what you see.
So the Speaker's doing a good job. He grew into the position quite nicely. He also kept a lot of Kevin McCarthy's people around him, especially in the fundraising side over at CLF. So that's been helpful. The members are very happy with him as Speaker, so I don't think it's probably going to be short-term any longer. Yeah. And you're right, Republican Main Street Partnership, we're living on the bubble. I talked to the members. I can't talk to the ones that we're in doing commercials and things for, but I talked to the others. We're feeling pretty good. Things seem to be coming back in our direction. And in a lot of the districts, Donald Trump, if he's behind, he's not behind by much anymore. So that really helps.
Does it bother you that this Jan 6 thing has to come up in every interview?
Yes, I'm tired of it. It was a terrible day. I do not condone any of that, but it's like, okay, let's try to move on from that. Yeah. Our members are going to certify the election. There's no question. They've even signed a letter stating that. What
do you think about this, Pat? We're still relitigating January 6th and some of the Senate debates. It keeps coming up. In Donald Trump's interview on Bloomberg yesterday, there was a bit of a difference of opinion on whether there was a peaceful transfer of power. This is, I guess, something we argue straight through November 5th.
Yeah, and we should be arguing about it. This happened. It was a travesty. It should never have happened. But you see Donald Trump out there consistently setting the stage again to once again try to reject the will of the people if he loses. So it's a live issue. It's not us making it a live issue. It's Donald Trump. So we got to be there to defend the Constitution.
Well, we just had a conversation about some of the Senate races that we're watching break out in debates here. These races are so close to call. Pat, you specialize in ad buying, and most of the ads have been reserved. How do you break through with less than 3 weeks to go and you're trying to get someone to listen?
Yeah, well, first of all, good debate performances. You're talking about those today because they are extremely important. Second of all, we're in a world where it's not all TV ads anymore. You know, you've got digital ads, you've got mail, you've got to be out there talking to reporters, you've got to be doing the interviews. So really, it's just running through the tape, consistently communicating with people, sticking with your message.
Yep. With that said, we've got some pretty big ad buys going on here. The Democratic Super PAC Future Forward dropping a combined $75 million. Are Republicans spending enough down ballot? A lot of this is coming from DNC, money raised by the Harris campaign. What does it look like for the GOP?
Well, she's certainly raised more money than we have. I mean, she's set an all-time record. But we're doing fine. We're raising a lot of money. Our members feel confident that they have enough money to get them through till the end. And our polls, I mean, I'm really excited about the members of the Republican Main Street Partnership. We are the ones that are going to be the majority makers. And all of them are starting to pick up, and they feel confident. And they are seeing more and more spend.
There's going to be a leadership fight, of course, when members get back on the Senate side.
On the
How
Senate
about
side,
on the House side? If Republicans don't maintain the majority, does Mike Johnson stay in members' good graces to be minority leader?
Don't know that. Don't know what happens with any of the leadership if we go in the minority. Right now, we're planning on majority and keeping the leadership. So that will be something that the members will discuss, frankly, when they come to our townhouse.
Yeah. When's that?
November 12th.
All right. I always did. When they get together at the townhouse, things happen. What's happening at your townhouse? When you consider the balance of power on Capitol Hill, there seems to be a conventional wisdom that Republicans take the Senate. Will Democrats take the House?
I think people are speaking a little too soon about the Senate. Now, it is a tough fight, but even places like Texas, where we were never supposed to be competitive, these races are getting closer. Florida, Nebraska. So, there's potential here. It goes either way, and we're focused on fighting it all out. Ultimately, we will deal with what we end up with in the end. We will. There's a real question about, do Republicans have a potential majority that can be governed? Is there real leadership there that can, lead their caucus? For us, we don't have that problem. We're much more united, and so that's what keeps me going.
When you look at the map, though, you need Sherrod Brown to win Ohio. You're assuming John Tester loses Montana. What else needs to happen?
Well, let's not write Tester's obituary yet. He's been there for a long time. He's like a known leader in the state. It's a tough fight. No doubt it is a tough fight. But if anybody can pull it off, it's Tester. So, but it's going to come down to Election Day. And right now is when the late-breaking voters, the swing voters, are making their decisions. So.
We talked about ticket splitting with Jessica Taylor from the Cook Political Report. She was making the point that that's going to be less of a phenomenon this time around. And I wonder how you see that, how important that down-ballot effect is, how important coattails are going to be in a state like Pennsylvania.
Oh, I think it's very important in Pennsylvania. I actually think Trump is going to end up winning Pennsylvania. We have a couple members of Congress from Pennsylvania. They agree with me. But I don't totally agree with her. I still see ticket splitting. I mean, we have a lot of members that will run ahead of Trump. Trump may lose their districts, but they're planning on winning their district. So I think ticket splitting is very much out there. Just look at what's going to happen in North Carolina with the governor's race. He's going to lose, but the Republicans are going to win.
Is it more common as you make your way down the ballot? It seems like the presidential race and the Senate races are kind of in lockstep. It gets noisier as you go down to the House.
It absolutely does. Then it becomes by personality, op research. I mean, the Republican nominee for North Carolina certainly is not going to win, but I expect all the members to, and then I expect Donald Trump to win North Carolina.
Politics requires a lot of compartmentalizing.
It sure does.
Doesn't it? We're good at that around here. Coming up, Kamala Harris takes her interview tour to Fox News. This is about to happen. Our political panel will have more on this next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
The states are now voting for it. And honestly, some of them are going much more liberal. Like in Ohio, I would have thought it might be
some of them are not
different, and some of them are not. But it's going to be redone. It's going to be redone. You end up with a vote of the people.
Donald Trump earlier today, amid the wagon wheels and bales of hay in a Fox News town hall, with what was an all-female audience, answering a question there about abortion restrictions across the country. Delicate issue. Speaking of Fox News, by the way, Kamala Harris's interview with Bret Baier set to air in the next hour. And back with us now, our political panel, Sarah Chamberlain and Pat Dennis, with me at the table here in Washington. You love it when we bring up abortion.
Love it.
This is a difficult issue for Republicans. Depending on where you're running, is that an appropriate answer? There were some pretty emotional moments in that town hall for Donald Trump to speak to voters nationally.
Well, Donald Trump has changed his mind many times on this issue. Unfortunately, it's even an issue. It's really hurting Republicans. And I agree with Senator J.D. Vance. We need to get our hands around this as a party. This is women's health care, and women are going to vote on this. And I don't think the polls are reflecting strong enough how we are going to vote on this.
Well, you're a media expert, Pat, a media consultant. How to use the airwaves, whether you're paying for it or not, is your job. Is this time well spent for Donald Trump and for Kamala Harris to be appealing to these very specific, in some cases narrow, constituencies to get some kind of a break between now and November 5th?
I don't fully understand what Trump is doing all the times with his media. You saw recently he shut down a Q&A session to listen to music for 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think this is really a particularly well thought out media strategy. His goal, really, his entire path to winning this election would be getting out low propensity voters. But you don't see him going to the places where the low propensity voters are. You see him on Fox, which is where everybody who already is going to vote for him watches TV all day.
Well, it's interesting because his campaign will say, you know what, this is a national election. Kind of doesn't matter where you're giving the speech. Our guy's going to get on the news and get on Twitter. Kamala Harris has her own strategy here, appearing in an audio town hall yesterday with Charlemagne the God, the Breakfast Club, the radio show. Kamala Harris had this to say about intergenerational wealth. Listen.
My agenda is about tapping into the ambitions and the aspirations, knowing that folks want to have an opportunity. If they want, they should have a meaningful opportunity to build wealth, including intergenerational wealth. Black families are 40% less likely to be homeowners than others. And that home ownership is one of the surest ways to build intergenerational wealth.
She was answering a question about reparations. How do you think she handled it? And does an interview like this, when you're blatantly trying to appeal to a specific demographic, in this case, young black men, does that work when you've got 2 weeks and change?
I actually don't know that answer. I think what she was trying to do was interesting, talking about wealth and passing it on. Does that mean she's not going to tax us? So we have more wealth to pass on? I don't know. That answer I found very confusing, frankly, because she tends to be very liberal, and she gave a more conservative answer, in my opinion.
Is it smart to go on Fox tonight? Should have done it already?
I think she should have done a month ago. I think it's very smart to go on Fox.
Well, Pat's questioning Donald Trump's strategy. Should that have been part of the early strategy for Harris?
Absolutely. She needs to go out and talk to as many people as possible. People don't know who she is.
Okay.
I mean, that's still an unknown. They don't know what she stands for. You know, she's been the vice president, I understand that, but she really hasn't been out front during the Biden administration. So there's a lot of unknown, and that's why you see the polls so close.
What's the equivalent for Donald Trump? I mean, I guess you MSNBC, or does he go on some liberal podcast? If he really wanted to reach voters who are not in his camp right now, who would he talk to?
I mean, you've seen him struggle with interviews where the person wasn't already on his side. Like, this has been a consistent issue for him this cycle. And I don't think his team wants to put him out there. I think they're keeping him to the rallies. They're keeping him to the Fox News, letting him call into Newsmax every once in a while. But I don't think they want him out there sparring with somebody because he's shown he's too erratic. He's willing to say something that could really hurt him.
Well, you sound like Kamala Harris now. She says that the campaign's trying to hide him, and she's creeping up on the age issue here. Is that going to be the closing argument, that he's just too old?
If I were her, I would absolutely use that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I don't know if that will really stick to Donald Trump. Nothing sticks to him. He's got a lot of energy.
He's not Joe Biden, is he?
He's not Joe Biden. I mean, Joe Biden, that was sad. Yeah, but he knocked himself out. There was a very sad performance that night. You don't see that from Trump. Maybe he dances to music for half an hour, but you don't see Donald Trump doing what you saw Joe Biden doing.
39 minutes. He put the DJ in DJT the other night. You're referring to. We had Sinead O'Connor. We had even Guns N' Roses as they played him off the stage. Isn't that an opportunity for Kamala Harris to say, I told you to watch these rallies?
Yeah, and in a lot of ways, he's driving that message himself, and she's talking about her message. And that's, for me as a Democratic strategist, exactly where I want us to be.
Okay. Well, so you've got 2.5 weeks to figure it out. How do you deliver that message?
Well, the other big part of the message is the abortion message, right? This is the issue where Donald Trump came in, took away a constitutional right that people had, and you saw in 2022, unacceptable to voters. So that is the key, core part of American Bridge's message when we are on TV in these swing states. That's what a lot of the down ballot candidates are talking about, and I think that will be in a lot of ways the closing message.
When you guys have dinner at the townhouse, when we're not around, we can't hear you talk about October surprises. Are you amazed that we haven't had some kind of event beyond the hurricanes, of course, an AI-driven video, something that tips the scales in this campaign?
Yes, but we still have a couple weeks to go.
Yeah?
You never know, but there's always some type of October
up,
surprise. Yeah, and I hope it's not the storms. They were obviously dreadful. In our members' district in Asheville, Congressman Edwards, he's doing a great job trying to help his people, but there will be something else. We know there will be.
Well,
we have 2.5 weeks. That's like an eternity.
He'd probably tell you there already was one when he had to put out that sheet debunking some of the wild rumors that we heard in North Carolina. Was that our October surprise?
I mean, that was tragic, and it was sad, and the fact that we have to deal with this is a real indictment of the way our media environment has fractured in some ways, that it's very difficult for people to come in and shut this stuff down. And thankfully, a lot of, even responsible Republicans came in and shut it down, but it needs to be bipartisan.
Well, it's going to be interesting to hear what the next news cycle brings with both of these candidates talking this evening. Sarah Chamberlain and Pat Dennis, thank you so much for your insights in a smart conversation, as you would always expect here on Bloomberg. Check out the Washington Edition newsletter. A lot more on what we were talking about on the terminal and online. And we'll meet you back here tomorrow on Balance of Power. This is Bloomberg TV and Radio.